venerated member of the industry. He's going to tell us a little bit about his history. I'd like to introduce the Control Trends community to Terry Casey from IntelliStar. Terry, welcome to Control Trends.
Hey, hi again. Nice to see you.
Terry, just tell us a little bit about your background. You've watched the industry evolve for the last 25 years, and tell us about your start, where we're at now, and what you see happening.
So, yeah, I founded a company in Britain called Trend, which had the distinction at that stage of being one of the very first businesses to bring distributed programmable DDC systems, peer-to-peer communication and the like, and fully configurable stuff to the industry. And that company is now it's gone through a number of different ownerships, but it's now part of Honeywell. It's continued to be very successful. It has a huge share of the UK market and others. But from this discussion, I think what's interesting is that at that stage in the 80s, our industry went through a very, very significant change of approach and technology, where we introduced distributed microprocessors and DDC systems, and we made a big step change from what had been before of analog and hybrid systems. And surprisingly, we haven't really seen an awful lot change since. Right, you could argue things like Echelon and Lon have had an influence, which has come and is departing, and we've seen some wireless systems coming in, but predominantly the architecture and the functions of these systems haven't really changed in the last 35 years, even 25 years, which is worrying. But I do think that it is changing now, and we've got this large change, innovation, metamorphosis, whatever you want to call it, going on in the industry now. I call it the building Internet of Things. It's where we start to do more things with the information that we get from the building and the equipment that's in it. We can start seeing proper analytics being applied to the buildings to work out what isn't working properly, which unfortunately the control systems by themselves do not manifest. We're seeing buildings being part of connected infrastructure, meaning that they're playing a part in the smart grid. They're becoming more interactive with the supply and demand of energy. They're participating more in the renewables part of the market, where we've got distributed generation, renewable generation mixed with storage, and trying to make the building be responsive to the energy availability or the cost of that energy, rather than just, well, I want it, therefore I use it. So those are interesting challenges. We can start getting buildings to behave and perform a lot better. We can use the information we get from them to reduce and minimize the cost of running them and servicing them, which is still considerable. So I think that we do have some new stuff, and you can argue that why is it coming about? Well, eventually the cost of computing is falling. It's getting very much into the distributed, embedded processor level. The amount you can do with, it's not quite, but it's close to the same technology as the smartphones go into the little boxes that we've got here. And so I think it's genuinely getting a change. The other change is that the building is going to be operated a little differently, and to implement and provide these, what I like to call smart services of the Internet of Things, people have actually got to be proactive. They've got to actually manage the buildings. They've got to be engaged with them. They've got to receive the output of the analytics system, which says, hey, it looks like we've got a problem with this damper or this economizer or this valve sticking, or this loop is unstable, and you've got to go and do something about it, and you've got to be proactive about that. You've got to be proactive about the way you write these rules, and so I think we're going to see more of quality smart services companies coming in, operating those buildings, and that will start off as a different market and a different segment from the straight building automation. Building automation is about supplying a system that sits there and does what it does. This is about using the information and the tools we have with that information proactively to be interactive with your building. So I think we're going to see some different people playing with this.
Just to inform some of those tools you were talking about, the InfraStack, for instance, within the IntelliStar product line, is a remarkable stack of technology. Why don't you tell us a little about the stack technology?
Yeah, that's a good one. So it's partly enabled by an underlying layer which is based on the Haystack data model, and I think that the Haystack data model lets us comprehend what the information coming out of the building means when it's been abstracted, when it's been detached from the building, because it's got enough tagging and stuff with it, which we know it's not just a reading of numbers, it's a temperature and it means this and it belongs to this piece of equipment which is on this plant with these interrelationships. So that's an important thing. But the other thing is with Infostack, it's part of a community and a collaborative thing. Haystack is itself, but we've also got we're building it on the same underlying layers as come from Sky Foundry, who've been doing a great job for the last 5 years or so in building a following in building analytics. So they're the leading party on that, and we're able to embrace that. And others have built visualization and control engines on the same thing. So we're getting to have a community which is built on the same underlying layers and the same data model and the same communication standards, which means that I hope that we're going to see a variety of products and systems which can interact and share data. It's no good if one crowd just goes, well, I've got a nice toy and widget and it works, but you're alone. We need this to be a participative community.
Well, Eric and I always talk about the thing called the race to the small space, where this technology is applied modularly, but on levels that it's needed for different building spaces. This is the race to the big space, because this really ties in your ADR. This makes the smart grid feasible. The more these are applied, these systems are put in, installed, and mastered, the sooner our energy issues can be solved.
And I think the energy space itself is going through a huge rate of change at the moment. The traditional notion that I've got big power stations and lots of gantries and cables and things, and it's beginning to change. That won't die out completely, obviously, but we're moving to more distributed generation, local generation. We're seeing renewables coming in. We're seeing microgrid, and that changes the way that the buildings and the consuming part have got to behave. We're also seeing the progression of the interactive part of that industry, the smart grid, going away from the old style of demand response, which was a capacity market, an insurance market. Sure. You know, so I know that's all you think you're going to need, but the regulator says you need to have a bit more capacity. So the cheapest way to get it was through demand response. Into more and more now, people are talking about a properly interactive grid, which has manifested itself through some sort of dynamic pricing. So rather than the complexities of the old way of demand response, which was transactional. That is, the person says, I want you to shed some load. How much and how much money do you want for it? And you had a transaction, and then they agreed, and then it said, okay, I've now agreed to that and implement. And then at the end of it, you have to show and measure that what you've done. That's an awful lot of transactions to keep pace with. And if you just said, well, actually, I've just made a way that it's become more expensive. So if you can avoid using it, you've saved. And that's just a single action, and you just have to respond in your own way. I think that's the way that it's going, and I've been happily building systems around about day ahead and dynamic pricing and responsive buildings and things. And it's actually quite technically fun. It's interesting, it's challenging, but it has a really good output and result when you can get these things to work properly.
Terry, that's wonderful, and that's great stuff. Tell our listeners how to get a hold of IntelliStar and Terry Casey.
Oh, well, IntelliStar, you can see the spelling of it, that we have a website, and if you want to get hold of us, fill that in, and if you want to direct it to me, then just put my name on it.
That's wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Nice to see you.
All right, Tracy. Thank you.
You're good.